Question. A plane makes the following displacements. Vector delta D1 equals 72 kilometers west, 30 degrees toward south. Vector delta D2 equals 48 kilometers south. And vector delta D3 equals 150 kilometers. The direction is west. The entire flight takes 2.5 hours. A. Calculate the total displacement of the plane. B. Calculate the average velocity of the plane. C. Calculate the average speed of the plane. This is the direction. This direction is north, also positive y. This direction is south, also negative y. This direction is east, also positive x direction. And this direction is west, also negative x direction. Now A. For the vector delta D1, delta D1 is 72 kilometers west, 30 degrees toward south. I draw the graph. So this is west, also negative x direction. This is south, also negative y direction. Now the direction of vector delta D1 is west, 30 degrees toward south, so it should be here. This is the vector delta D1. And this angle is 30 degrees. And this vector should be delta D1x. And this vector will be delta D1y. And this angle is a right angle. So from the graph, we can know that the magnitude of delta D1x of the vector delta D1x equals the magnitude of the vector delta D1 multiply cosine 30 degrees, and this equals the magnitude of delta D1, vector delta D1 is 72 kilometers multiply cosine 30 degrees, and this equals 62.35 kilometers. Then the vector delta D1x just is negative 62.35 kilometers. It's negative because its direction is the negative x direction. Then the magnitude of the vector delta D1y equals the magnitude of vector delta D1 multiply sine 30 degrees, and this equals 72 multiply 1/2, and it equals 36 kilometers. Then the vector delta D1y is just negative 36 kilometers. It's negative because its direction is the negative y direction. Now, for vector delta D2, delta D2 is 48 kilometers. The direction is south. So this direction is south, also negative y direction. And this is the vector delta D2. So from the graph, we can know that the vector delta D2y just equals the vector delta D2 and equals negative 48.0 kilometers. It's because the vector delta D2 is parallel to the negative y direction, to the south direction. And the vector delta D2x is 0. Then for vector delta D3 is 150 kilometers west. And this direction is west, also negative x direction. And this is just the vector delta D3. So from the graph, we can know that the vector delta D3x is just delta D3 because delta D3 is parallel to the west direction, also to the negative x direction, and this equals negative 150 kilometers. It's negative because its direction is the negative x direction. Now we can get the vector delta dtx just equals the vector delta d1x plus the vector delta d3x, and this equals negative 62.35 plus negative 150 and equals negative 212.35 kilometers. And the vector delta dty just equals the vector delta dy plus the vector delta d2y, and equals negative 36 plus negative 48, and equals negative 84 kilometers. Then I draw the graph of them. This is vector delta dtx, and this is vector delta dty, and this is vector delta dt, and this angle is theta, and this angle is a right angle. Now from the graph we can know that the magnitude of delta dt, vector delta dt, just equals square root the magnitude of delta dtx square plus the magnitude of delta dty square. Now this equals square root 212.35 square plus 84 square, and this equals 228.36 kilometers. And the angle theta equals arc tangent. The magnitude of delta dty over the magnitude of delta dt tx and equals arc tan 84 over 212.35 and this equals 21.58 degree. So vector delta dt is just 228.36 kilometers. Now the direction is west 21.58 degree toward south because this direction is west and this direction is south. Then question B, the average velocity just equals the total displacement delta dt over the time interval delta t, and this equals 228.36 over 2.5, and this equals 91.34 kilometers per hour. The direction is west, then 21.58 degree toward south. I do not put the units in the calculation to make it seem simple and neat. Now question C. C asks for the speed. So speed, we should find the total distance. So the total distance delta dt equals the magnitude of delta d1 plus the magnitude of delta d2 plus the magnitude of delta d3, and this equals 72 plus 48 plus 150 and equals 280 kilometers. Then the average speed just equals the total distance delta dt over time interval delta t and equals 280 over 2.5, and this equals 112 kilometers per hour.